Everybody in. BR is there. Ravi Ramakrishnan is there. Or
Ravi will join TMD. I think
okay.
He's just settling in, so we can start off the.
So Peter, over to you. Let's start on time.
Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Peter Balin, and I am the Chief Operating Officer of TMI Group, India's largest HR services company across.
Virtual background. Okay. Okay. But now the back.
Yeah. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Peter Balin, and I am the Chief Operating Officer of TMI, India's largest HR services company across talent acquisition and talent management. A warm welcome to this webinar, aptly titled India at 75, India Skilling, Winning in the Next 25 Years. The idea to have this webinar came when we were celebrating the 75th independence of our beautiful country, India. The next generation will determine the future of the country, and where we stand in the world will, to a large extent, have a bearing on how we skill our next generation. This topic is there in the mind share of a lot of leaders across the country, and we thought to discuss this very important topic, we have lined up a very distinguished panel. Without much delay, I would like to once again welcome each of you to this webinar, and I welcome Mr. T. Muralidharan, Chairman TMI Group, who is the moderator of today's webinar and who's well known in the country as one of the evangelists for skilling in India. With this, the next 90 minutes, just hang on, we will have some wonderful discussions. And the whole idea is that after this discussion, we should come up with recommendations which we can submit to the government with some implementable ideas. So that's the whole idea. So with this, I welcome the entire panel, the distinguished panel, every one of you who've taken time out to join us, and to Mr. Muralidharan. Over to you, TMD.
Thank you so much, Peter. Our format is going to be very simple. After my initial introduction, I'm going to invite each of the speakers to speak for about 12 minutes. And after that, there's going to be a Q&A. So those of you who want to ask questions, please post it in the chat box, and Peter and team will be picking some of those questions to ask. Obviously, everybody's questions cannot be answered. So what we're trying to do is to collect the balanced questions and send it back to the speakers and ask them to comment and collect all the question answers into one single document, which will circulate to everybody who attends and also try and put it in public domain. So again, a warm welcome to all of you. I want to talk a little bit about what is the 75-25. Obviously, India is entering the 75th year of independence. Next 1 year is going to be a celebration. And you look at 75 numbers, there are two views. One, it's a long time for a country. Look at Israel, it's gone somewhere. We have also around the same time. The other side of the story, it's a very, very short time. Look at America, look at UK. These countries have very long history, and therefore 75 is a small time in the history of a country. Either way, the 75 years have been very momentous for this country. And more specifically for the skill movement, it came into focus sometime in 2009, 2010, when NSDC was formed. Obviously, skill has not been new to India. There was an earlier avatar for a long time. Skill industry was in operation. But somehow things changed a lot when NSDC was formed in 2008 or 9. And I remember with a lot of myself, Rajeev, some of us, we had a lot of stars in our eyes when we used to go to NSDC in 2010. We used to have partners conferences and so on and so forth. And in the last 10, 12 years has been extraordinary in many, many ways. But if you take stock at the end of 10, 12 years, there are several versions of stories. One version of story, extraordinary capacity building, extraordinary set of people coming into the industry. The other narrative, which is very common in the press, very common in some sections of the people, is that this industry has not lived up to its expectation. There's a lot of expectation from the Pradhan Mantri when he came to power in 2014. The skill ministry was formed in 2015. So there is another version that things have not worked out well. So one can talk ad nauseum about what is right, what is wrong. I'm always a believer that the past is good for learning, but will never be anchored in the past. The moment you are anchored in the past, your stories become either extraordinarily positive or irrelevant in terms of current current context, or very negative and very depressing. So I thought, why we want to talk about the past? Let's talk about the future. Why 25? I always believe that when you look at a skill of a nation, if you look at a skill at the country level, at a company level or a small level, a short term is okay. But at the country level, many countries like Japan, Germany, many of the modern countries, they all looked at nation building as a long term initiative. And skill is one of the basic foundation of a nation. And therefore, the 25 years hence, in my mind, is very crucial. I'm fully aware that the COVID has changed everything upside down, and we in the skilling industry were exactly in the crossroads. On the left, you go into a path of downhill, you might go in a path of annihilation, we shut down of the industry. You go take a right turn, everything can change dramatically. We could become a global player, we could become India could be a supplier of skill to the world. So there are many options. And the last option is, of course, continue as you are, and whatever you're doing, that's a straight path. I don't know where it is leading. So today I picked together 5 people whom I respect a lot. These are people who have spent their time in the skill industry. They hone their skills or hone their own ideas on the ground reality of skills. So I asked all of them to speak for 12 minutes. I've asked them to speak about the future. I've asked them to speak about constructive suggestions on how to go forward. I think that's the backdrop for today's session. And I'm a big optimist. I've always believed that things can change dramatically for the future in favor of the skill industry. And therefore, I'm starting this initial conversation and I invite my first speaker, Rajeev Nair, with a very positive sense, frame of mind. And I hope at the end of this 1.5 hours, I think my spirits will be uplifted, as I hope some of yours will be. And we will take away from this session some very insight, some knowledge, some gyan, and more importantly, some action items for the future. So I want to again stop here and then focus our attention on listening to our first speaker. I'll be inviting them one by one. And first is Dr. Rajeev Nair, because the entire idea of this seminar came because Rajeev called me some time ago when he told me, Murli, do you know something? I just got my PhD and PhD in skills. I said I was shocked because we are trying to do short-term programs on one end, and here is a man who went and got his PhD in skills. And actually, in a way, it's a celebration of the first person I know who's got a PhD in skills, and that's how Dr. Rajeev Nair, Mr. Rajeev Nair has become Dr. Rajeev Nair. He's a global HR head and a chief transformation officer. And the word transformation means a lot for Ramki Group, and that also a very powerful segment called Ramki Enviro, which does a lot of work in waste collection, waste reuse, and so on and so forth. They are one of the largest in Asia's leading providers of environment management. That's what Ramki Enviro does, and he wears multiple hats. One is the chief of HR for the entire globally. He's also the chief transformation officer. I'm sure he works. I think one of the consulting companies. He's working with them for transforming the company, and is also the CSR head. But formerly, he was also the head of Task. Task is a very unique institution which was started by the government of Telangana when the state separated. And I think Sunil was brought in with a very clear mission that the earlier avatar had some limitations and therefore bring a new look and feel, modernity, new thought process. And Sujeev did it extremely well. And I can speak with a lot of conviction. K.T. Ramarao once or twice met me and you told me, get me more people like Sujeev. And I think that's a good introduction to Sujeev. Sujeev, I know you're a Six Sigma belt, and I hope that we would like to hear from you, especially in the context of your PhD and your work and task. Tell us something about how we can change the entire models. The bigger challenge today is the models of funding. And you know that the government has dominated the funding model significantly. There are a lot of pluses and minuses. But I think in the process, I have a humble opinion that the government funding model has killed many other funding models. For example, student paid model, for example, employer paid models. So I think I have posed 5 questions to Sujeev as my initial introduction, and with a request for him to change as he likes. The first question is, what are the advantages and disadvantages of government funding? How government funding can kill or support other funding models, specifically CSR. Some of us know that CSR is becoming a very key factor in this. What is the catch? What is the opportunities in CSR? Importance of the current fact that other major beneficiaries like student and the employer have minimal stake or zero stake. What are the implications of that? And how to change the current paradigm. So I think this is the 5 questions I posed to Sujeev, and obviously Sujeev is more knowledgeable than I am. So he has got the freedom to choose as he likes in any order of these questions and where the emphasis should be. But Sujeev, I think if you can end with 3 or 4 recommendations of what you think we should do on specifically on the blending model or blended models or models of funding, I will be grateful. And your time, 12 minutes starts now. We're going to track the time. Thank you, Sujeev.
Thank you, Murali, for the kind words. I'm actually honored. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I want to start by talking about 2 very important data points. One, the World Economic Forum believes that the world is facing a reskilling emergency, as 1/3 of all the jobs worldwide are likely to be transformed by technology in the next 10 years, especially with demands of the 4th industrial revolution. The second data point, if we look at the overall CSR ecosystem in India, the total CSR fund investment by companies was estimated at 50,000 crores in March 2019, since that mandatory 2% CSR rule came in. This 50,000 crores is in addition to what the various central and state governments are actually spending on skilling. These two, I want all of us to keep these 2 data points in mind and look at how important skilling is going to be. And in my several years of experience on working in this skilling area, there are two key elements for any successful skilling. One, connecting the demand to supply through partnerships. Very, very important. And the second learning is focusing purely on need-based skilling programs rather than doing the generic route. If you look at the major stakeholders today, we have the industry, we have academia, we have government. We have the training and skilling partners ecosystem. Partnerships among these people are actually fundamentals to success in skilling programs. If you look at the supply side, there are several unemployed youths available both in the agri and unorganized sector. There are several colleges in the country that are churning graduates, ITIs, polytechnic engineers. On the demand side, in addition to the entrepreneurial and small business setup opportunity recruitments, there are also large, medium, and small scale organizations coming up with a lot of demands for jobs. Unfortunately, the connect between demand and supply is not happening very well. If you look at the large organizations in general, they have good recruitment team and most of their demands are met by themselves. The real challenge is coming with the medium and small scale companies where they don't have enough funds to do skilling themselves, or they do not have the right channels where they can get it. So one very important insight is if the recruitment needs, skilling needs of medium and small scale companies can be aggregated, my belief is the numbers will be much more than what large organizations are looking at. So as Murli mentioned, right, what are the funding and skilling models? I think the first premise is for us to understand what are the requirements of these stakeholders and delivering skilling to these requirements. So there are 4 areas I'm going to touch upon very briefly. One, I'll talk about some partnerships and how funding of skilling works. Second, very important thing I've learned is the need to enhance awareness. Third, leveraging of technology. And the fourth and the most important, execution excellence in managing these partnerships and delivering programs. So let me take the first part on partnerships for skilling. Over the last several years, I think the use of CSR funds is working very well. And some of the ways this funding can be done is for organizations to adopt colleges and use their CSR funds. NHPC, Maruti Suzuki, they have a nice process of adopting ITIs, and they set up ITIs through this PPP model. There are other corporates, again, who use their funding to set up skilling centers. ICICI Academy for Skills, Tata Strive, Ramki Foundation, L&T. I mean, if you look at L&T, for the last several years, they've established construction skill training institutes across the country, and they run 3 to 6 months courses, largely for the unorganized workforce. Infosys spends a lot of time in skilling teachers and faculty across colleges in addition to students. They use their CSR funding for it. The third type of partnership which worked very well in TASK, and Murli alluded to this some time back, is a co-pay model where, 20% student, the cost is borne 20% by the student, 40% by the government, 40% by the corporates. In some cases, it is 50%, 50%. So we ran a program called the Finishing School in TASK, where unemployed youth were brought in and skilled for an 8 to 12 week period. These skillings were done specifically based on an organization requirement. It could be a small, medium, or large organization. So exactly what the organization wanted, we understood what is it from a technical, from a process, from a domain standpoint, and ran that program. And these finishing schools were very successful. If 100 students were skilled through this program, 60 of them got jobs. So again, the point here is need-based skilling. And we also had introduced something called the finishing school in colleges itself. And there were several students willing to pay, so long as the program helped them impart the right skill and they were connected to the organization. I can recollect Safran Electrical and Power, the aerospace industry, came in here. TASK had aggregated ITI Polytechnic students, put them through a skilling, and today several of them are working in Safran here in Hyderabad. We've done similar work with Hitachi and several other companies. And the fourth option for partnership is looking at this entrepreneurial sector. The Banking Financial Sector Council and TASK had created a program for looking at just graduates in the remote districts of Telangana. They were trained on GST skilling, and they were connected to funds, just for them to buy a computer, a small table. And they went and, did GST filing for those small and medium-sized entrepreneurs who couldn't afford CAs. They did it. It's a very, very scalable model. Similar was another model called the Skills on Wheels. This was again a program in collaboration with GIZ, where the needs of solar companies were aggregated. And there was a van which had a complete solar module and a lab built in. This van traveled to the remotest parts, got the unemployed youth together, and they were theory courses run in a school and practicals in that van. And they became technicians. Now again, this is a funding model, training partner, the government, and institute. Similarly, in Ramki, as part of a CSR, we have a collaboration with We Hub, the Women Entrepreneur Hub, where we run a pre-incubation program exclusively for women entrepreneurs from the rural parts of the state. They come, they spend about 8 to 12 weeks, and then they are taught everything. They just have to have an idea. They come with the idea, they are trained on how to take that idea, how to market them. They work with mentors, and then they are connected to angel investors and seed fund people so that they can start their business. A similar collaboration Ramki Enviro also has with NABARD, where we look at skilling tribals in we call it the natural resource management, how well they can do cashew and mango farming, about 30,000 to 50,000 per acre. So these are all the ways collaboration can come. And Murli, it is very important. It's just not that the government funding. I think only when these stakeholders come together, the government, the person who is getting skilled, industry, and the training partners, and when they work in synergy, I think that is when the best skilling happens. In addition to these partnerships, I also want to focus on 3 other areas. And I think every one of us on this call can do our bit. One, enhancing awareness. Even today, 60% of India is rural. The reach across urban areas is reasonably good, but we have to reach across to the youth in the rural India. Ecosystem partners, stakeholders should come together, periodically discuss the success and challenges. Murli, I really thank you for putting up this session, right? There are several people who are talking about this, and they in turn can go back and talk about whatever they have learned. Sector skill councils, state skill missions, they're doing a lot of work, training partners. I think it's important that they start publishing papers about their success stories, even when it is small. There's a lot of work that has happened in the last few years. And another very important thing is these success stories should be in vernacular. So for people across the states of India to understand and see what are the potentials that they have. And last but not the least, social media is something that we have to encash on, which will do a lot of good and will also enhance impact. So that's on the awareness. Another very important aspect I did mention about the first data point is our ability to leverage technology. One of the things I feel I couldn't really do was to aggregate the demand of mid and small size companies. If you look at a platform,
Sujeev, 1 minute more to go.
Yeah. Absolutely. If we can look at a platform to aggregate the demand of medium and small scale companies, I think that will be great, and skilling can be based on them. There are some organizations which are doing it at a CSR level. For example, the Telangana Social Impact Group. There are several NGOs, organizations like CSR Box. But this has to be scaled up. There's a lot of value that can happen here. And the last point, committed execution. This is something can really change the skilling space. So having a plan with a milestone, and that can be tracked by a project or program manager in every partnership is important. In Task, we have seen success. When a partnership was there, it had milestones. We followed through it, results came in. And when results come, it earns trust. And with trust, it enhances partnership. And partnership enhances skilling. So that's all from my side, Murli. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sujeev. I think you covered a lot of landscape in discussions in this discussion. But one point I want to ask you one question before I go to the next speaker. See, when you talk about blended models, there has to be mutual trust between the various funding partners among themselves. For example, and I believe this with a lot of responsibility, the government has to learn to trust the other partners who are investing. For example, a CSR partner comes in or an employer puts in money. The government has to let go of its very complex systems of measurement, complex system of reporting, if they're going to be one of the stakeholders in funding. So my question is the ecosystem, is the government ready for partnership? So far, whatever I have seen, public-private partnership, government has been a disaster. So how will they adopt to a model where government only one of the funding partner, like Task, you're a government party, right? You're partnering with me as an employer, TMI as an employer. How do we build trust for this partnership to work?
Very simple, Murli. Two things. As I mentioned, we have to show results. Start with a pilot. The way we started the programs at Task is we started a finishing school, explained the proof of concept, started with 100 people. The first batch we did in Warangal, there were only 25 people who got placed. That was a starting point. Subsequently, there are about 17 batches that were done, and the success rate went to 60%. So there were several training partners who got involved in this. There was several funding that came from companies. There are several funding that came from the government, and that was able to scale up. So one is we have to show results. Only when results come, there will be trust. And second, the ability to go down to the rural parts of India and creating this awareness. There is so much of talent and potential lying in there. And that calls for a lot of work and reach out. And these two things will really help scale up. And I'm very confident, just like the government of Telangana did it, there are many other governments. Kerala is doing well. Bangalore is doing well. It's only a matter of result. We show results, and I'm very confident governments will come up with sponsor.
Thank you. Our next speaker is going to be Rajeev Sharma. Rajeev is a founder chairman of Manpower Pragati, a close friend of mine. Rajeev, once he starts speaking, I think he's a fund of knowledge. His in-depth experience is gone all over the country. He has burnt his fingers in some places. He's made enormous success in many places. So we are very happy to have you, Rajeev, in two capacities. One as the chairman of Empower Pragati, and more importantly, is also the president of ASTP. ASTP stands for
Alliance.
Alliance of Skill Training Providers. So Rajeev is also a graduate in law, but most importantly, his claim to fame, he was a very senior executive in earning crores of rupees. Rajeev, income tax is not listening, so
but it is all paid, so it doesn't matter.
We got some crores of rupees salary in Bharti Group. He left all of them because I think his heart was in the right place. And I think Rajeev has spent more than 10 years in this industry, and Rajeev has a very great understanding of the corporate side of the business, and therefore our biggest challenge in this industry now, Rajeev, is very clearly that today's skilling industry, nobody wants to invest. You know that, and we know both of us have been in the market. How do you make the skilling industry an attractive proposition for investors? That's a question broadly. I have framed a few questions for you, and obviously you can add, amend, modify as you like. How does it make it attractive proposition? Number one, why do we need fresh investment? Why do we need investment? Two, what are the global models in which investment is attracted by other countries? What is the current level of interest that investors have in the skilling industry, especially in the COVID model, and why? What are the reasons for low or high level of interest? What are the challenges in attracting investment? And what can government and NSDC do to change the investor perceptions? And lastly, what can skill companies like yours and mine do to change that perception? So I think, to me, if we don't attract investments, some of the existing companies will fall down. But more importantly, if you want high technology to come, edutech to come into skills, we need money, right? So we need the investment is a very important dimension, and you have got a lot of experience in both in the corporate side, in the telecom sector. So just share your thoughts in these four areas. Your 12 minutes starts now. Thank you.
Thanks, Murli, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Murli, you said yourself that, why do you need investment is a no-brainer, frankly speaking. Because if you look at it, while I'm going to deal what should be done in the next 5 years, but I would set a context for a minute or so, saying what's the real problem right now? Why the skill industry is not really attracting investment from VCs or private VC for that matter. There have been here and there some impact investment happened, but they are absolutely minuscule. And even in impact investments is not happening in the scale it should happen. So first look at it, how is skilling in India aspirational? You think the student whom you mobilize or we mobilize really willing to come and spend 3 months. He's been cajoled. He's been sometime even by force. You send him a bus, or you bring him somehow. Okay, so that's one problem. Second is the largest, and you've been speaking many times about it. It's a supply driven. It's not demand driven. So what does it mean, supply driven? It means that government has a social agenda, and government has to do it very large number in a very little amount money. Because if you compare the price points with any developed nation, take it Australia, take it Germany, take it any, you would find that the training cost there for a week is not paid here even for 90 days training. So of course, the quantity versus quality issue comes into picture. Now, how would you make it aspirational? And I remember in your city, once upon about 8-9 years back, there was a security gentleman. I'm just narrate a story called Subramanian Reddy. He had 2 surnames. So I was sitting with him, and once I said, "Sir, you spend tons of money in training these students. Why don't you hire?" Because what is aspirational in this country is government job. Every second person, if you tell him that after this 90 days of training, you would get a job, government job, take my word for it, the guy will start paying for entire 90 days, not for, and government doesn't need to pay. So government need to actually, what I'm trying to say, how would you, the moment it becomes demand driven and the student paid model, and how would it become a student paid model if you make it aspirational? How would you make it aspirational? If the largest spender start even hiring. So the scenario is very paradoxical. Government spends, does not hire. Private sector is totally lukewarm. Neither spends nor hires, because it does not value this short-term or long-term training. So when it comes to hiring government, you're almost on a training partner most often than not on with a training, with a begging bowl, requesting the corporate world to hire it. Barring your example, Murli, because where you only do training where, where there is a demand. You first create a demand, you go to a corporate and say, listen, how many guys you need, and I will train only that much. You do not go on a bulk training. So that really makes sense. And in those cases, several times I've heard from you and other organizations, students have paid for the training. So the point I'm making, it has to be, because whenever I've met a private VC, he simply asks the question, okay, you're doing great. Your bottom line looks better for last several continuous years, but it is all 85-90% government driven, and which is very uncertain business. And it's not a quality training. So it would not. So first point very clearly that, so how would you attract private investment is make it aspirational. For making aspirational, all these things. Why do you need? Now, there's a question, of course, to make it aspirational, you have to make it quality. And in order to make it a quality, you need to set up world-class infrastructure. You need to get world-class teachers. You need to get your trainers trained at the best facilities. Like if you say Ramakrishnan will perhaps speak about it, L&T has opened a training institute for trainers. So if you send your trainers there, they're sitting there and getting trained, and they come back and train, then perhaps it become aspiration, the students start paying. Then I would go into say that, are there global trends? There are multiple. If you look at Latin America, there is actually compulsory deduction from the employer's salary, which goes to government funding. Now, government uses that fund to create world-class infrastructure. Now, if you look at it, our country, there is no amount of money corporate spends, but corporate wants to hire every possible. Sector skill council. I'm sorry to say, but sector skill councils were formed with a clear-cut mandate to make sure corporate connect between vocational education and corporate world. But unfortunately, while sector skill council may have done some standardization of training and assessment and TOTs and so on and so forth, but the part which was most crucial was the connecting the corporate world to the skill sector, which did not happen. And unfortunately, that part is very, very crucial. I mean, I come from telecom, and one day some senior person, I don't want to name, I was sitting with him, and I asked him question, how many people you asked from sector council, telecom, you're the chairman of the sector council? Answer was no. So I'm saying that's not happening. That should happen. So that if that happens, start happening, the immediately private sector will start looking at, the private VCs will start looking at that the corporates are very much interested in. Well, another situation that how do you attract the investment is, that I thought that is maybe you found very radical kind of solution, which I'm going to talk about it. I'm saying, why can't training partners themselves set a fund sort of situation? So 10 training partners together come and create a fund. And in that fund, as and when you need to draw money, we can draw. And then this fund as such can go and get even listed. I was talking to a friend of mine who is the chairman of a very big, large investment firm outside the country. And he was saying that this model has succeeded. There's people, a sector which was neglected by private VC, the sector players themselves came together and created a fund. And once he created a fund, the fund started doing well. They went to the stock exchange, listed the company. And as such, then multiple kind of funding started happening. So that's another aspect. The third one, which is I feel very important, Murli, again, is that we should bracket now our entire skilling fraternity into three. First is the lowest, the BOP, bottom pyramid part of saying where government social agenda should work, that government should pay for the funding of those people and should be mostly free of cost. Okay, so that should be the one area, very clear demarcation. Second should be middle level, where we are saying that people have an ability to invest and they should be actually. And the third one is we are not addressing graduates. There are large number of unemployed graduates, perhaps more unemployed graduates than the non-graduates in this country. Nobody is looking at it because all government funding says it should be 10th or 12th class, pass or fail. It should be bottom of the pyramid. So on, so many great adjectives, which I hate, frankly speaking, but there are. So if you remove those adjectives and it starts addressing unemployed graduates also, perhaps you would find it become, because graduate, if you look at it, he would rise faster into corporate world. And if once he rises faster, the others will follow him. And when they start following him, the corporate will become interested, the BCs will get interested. So that's another, I feel that it should be divided into multiple. And the ones which I spoke in the beginning about social impact funding. Frankly speaking, there are some 2 or 3 or 4 fundings, and I don't want to name it on public platform, they have happened. But actually the success story, the last speaker was speaking that the good work which you do should create a success story. But unfortunately, in our case, the success stories are not. Hello, am I audible?
Yeah, you are very audible.
So there is no platform whatsoever to create a success story platform. So even if one funding happened in the skilling sector, and which is great, should be talked about it, should be spoken about. Social media, but it doesn't happen. In isolation, here and there it happens. So it's not being exploited to the extent it's possible. I went to Australia and I found, Murli, to my great surprise, that initial first few fundings in vocational colleges, and there are vocational colleges which are perhaps now starting to come up in India also. There are large amount of funding happen in vocational colleges through social impact funding to begin with. And because what is the difference of social impact funding? The social impact funding would not immediately start looking at their returns. They would look at it, impact, and then returns. They say and returns are a longer duration. It is not that they're looking immediate next 3 years exit. They're looking for exit which lasts for 10, 12, 15 years. So the social impact funding, we should focus on social impact funding. So if these two things, return and exit. Now, return and exit for a private VC, of course, his only job, he is into business to make money. He is not in business to create impact. So if we should go social impact, then perhaps the other thing, another model which has a development model. And I somewhere about 3-4 years, I wanted to do some training for the delivery boys of these online retail organizations. And I studied Amazon model. You know what Amazon model? Amazon model is that they start training delivery boys and courier, go down in charges, and not with the perspective they will have. They say it's development investment. So they are doing development investment. And once these guys get trained, some of them, or most of them rather, actually get hired by Amazon themselves. So I thought that if we start using development model, perhaps it would make a difference to perhaps other organizations will start following this model that, okay, I would right now, for example, take a telecom company and it comes forward and says, I would need or not need 100,000 engineers, but I would invest in 100,000 engineers training, which would get hired by other organizations too. So that's called development funding.
1 minute to go, Rajeev, 1 minute. Yeah.
Oh, fair enough, fair enough. So actually, Murli, the topic you've given me is I can go on speaking for 12 hours. so the fact remains that if some of these things, and I'm very clear, the one last fact, which we must exploit, you say that create an adverse situation to an opportunity. This COVID-19 can become blessing in disguise if we can exploit it well. What I mean to say that digitization of training, offline and online model. If you create a platform, and we are trying to empower Pragati, we're trying to create it, and we have a fair amount of success. I'm not saying obscene kind of success, but there's a fair amount of success we have got in the last few months. To create a blended model, and students. Now, most of the time, college, and God knows when this COVID will go off totally. So use this platform. And when you have a database of millions of students whom you have trained for the last 10 years through NSDC, through other schemes. Now, even if half of the database is put in onto this platform, and this platform is connected to the corporates, perhaps will be exploited, and this would then attract large amount of, because technology is one investors are looking very strongly. So if you have a database and you have robust technology which is seamlessly connected to the corporate, perhaps you would have a success story there waiting for you. So that's all, Murli, I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajeev. I think it's a very, very well put. I think you've covered a wide variety of options for investment. I have only one question. I think Ramakrishnan is also here. He's an advisor to the L&T chairman and also NSDC chairman. I'm asking one question. Maybe Ram, you can also answer it when you talk. I'm asking a question. Why can't CSR fund 50,000 crores is available? Why can't you encourage 1% or 2% of that money to be brought in as an investment, social impact investment into the skilling industry? Then instead of 50,000 crores, if you put 5%, you get 2,500 crores to be invested into the industry, and the investment will lead to a multiplier. Right now, we are funding the end user, which is the student. But the entire 50,000 crores is going towards training or funding the student. But if you fund the training partner, a portion of that, it could really change and transform this industry. I want Ram, who's going to be my next speaker, to focus on it. I think another point, I think Rajeev, you mentioned about graduates. I think, like we say in Hindi, aapke muh mein ghee shakkar, we have been in exactly that business from inception, you know that. And I think we have done more than 2.5 lakh graduates right now, unemployed graduates. And your statement about graduate unemployment is the biggest problem, is a bigger problem than unemployed non-graduates. And the LFPR, what we call labor force participation rate for men is 50%. One in two boys are not looking for a job. One in 4 girls only are looking for a job. So I think there are big challenges in the graduate space. I agree with you. I'm going to invite the third speaker, Mr. Ramakrishnan.
So I would answer your question, Murli. I forgot to talk about CSR. Actually, Murli, you put it. I wanted to talk about it. I forgot about it.
We'll come back to you, or you can finish it briefly, then I can go forward.
So very briefly. So you know it, I'll go on, but very briefly. There needs to be legislation for this. Government needs to only do this, that this funding would largely be spent and will be allowed even if corporate spend their own workforce. Right now, there is a restriction that you can't train your own workforce. And if you do it, it is not considered CSR. So there has to be a legislation, remove this ban and bring a legislation and do it. Perhaps this will happen. This will be the greatest beginning if this happens. Government does not need to do anything, just bring in the legislation and this will happen.
Thank you. I think that's a very good point, Rajeev. I'm going to invite Mr. K. Ramakrishnan, who is the Chief Executive of the Skill Development Mission. He is the Office of the Chairman of NSDC and L&T. All of us know Mr. Nayak is a doer. He's got a reputation of somebody who can change landscapes, and we are very fortunate to have him as the Chairman of NSDC. And Mr. Ramakrishnan, whom I met very recently, was extremely, I'm saying it publicly, you're a refreshing change. when I spoke to you. And very often we meet people who are always have a prejudiced mind when you meet them. And I have been in the skill industry for 10 years. When you meet them, all they tell you is that why we are giving a wrong reputation, bringing a wrong reputation in the industry. So my experience with you has always been you're a forward thinker. And I think that's why I really would like to hear your thoughts. Ram is, I'm going to call him Ram, is a mechanical engineer from VJTI Mumbai. And he has been a graduate engineering trainee from L&T. I was telling him that job I tried and they did not give me the job. They thought I was not good enough to be an engineer. Ram, I think people like you are better than me. I failed in the interview process.
Maybe it was L&T's loss that you didn't come.
I don't know. But coming back, I think Ram has spent most of his time in the construction and mining machinery business. And right now, and also in HR, I think one of the best part about his role right now is to create something in the future. The next 2 years, he told me that Mr. Chairman of Nayak's time, we want to do something dramatically different. We want to do an alternative model. And that also was a part of the inspiration. Sujeev Nair I met, and then I met Ram immediately, and that is why this seminar has happened. To Ram, I asked a different set of questions, and that is the most fundamental questions of this seminar. We know that youth are not excited about scaling. I mean, any which way you look at it today, you really have to, if you are now giving, I'm sure, Ram, you are aware, in Hyderabad, in many of the construction industry, they give you breakfast, lunch, dinner, they give you a nice air-conditioned room to sleep, and people are not coming for training, right? Mobilization is very tough in many of them. So I think the question that I asked Ram is that how to make skilling attractive to youth. Number one, why do youth shun skills? What's the reason? What are the factors which drive this behavior? Why are the skilled labor in India so poorly paid? I think in any stretch of imagination, I think our Indians are being paid even a purchase price parity, in my mind, anyway, 1:10. What are the factors which drive poor compensation? Ram has been on the other side, the employer side. Maybe you can throw some light on that. How is the skill compensation arrived at? I've been very disappointed with the way the skill compensation is structured as to unskilled, semi-skilled, and skilled. And it comes into, if you see the minimum wages regime, it's very depressing. There is no scientific method. So the question is, can we build a model to differentiate the compensation of a skilled welder from a skilled carpenter? They can't be just because they're skilled, they mean they get the same weight. Is there a model possible? And there has been attempt by to brand the skilling. I think NSDC started the Hunar campaign, which was very popular at one point in time. What has been the outcome? So we have tried many things to get the youth to come into this sector. I think we still are struggling. So Ram, I think your experience from the employer side, your experience in the construction industry, from the NSDC standpoint, will be very useful to us. Over to you, Ram.
Okay, thank you, Murli. Thanks a lot to you and TMI for giving me an opportunity to be part of this very important discussion. And I would also like to just apologize because I'm not able to get the TMI background due to some technical issues with my laptop. But you can just take it for granted that that's the background there. Just as a precursor to my, getting into the question that Murli asked, and I will take the liberty of maybe not answering every question, but overall the issue of how to make skilling more attractive to youth will be my focus of my response. So today, let me start with some facts, and the buzzword that has been going on for the last few years, that India is poised to play a very important role in the global workforce by leveraging its what they call the demographic dividend. That's been a buzzword, but we need to really do some serious work on it. A lot has been done, but more needs to be done. Some facts and figures, because that is something that sets the context of what we are talking about. The median age of India is about 27.3 years. 35% of its population is in the age bracket of 15 to 65, which is considered the employable age bracket. Yearly, we add 7 to 8 million people to our workforce. So in the next few years, we will be adding a large number to the workforce, and that will be another big challenge. 30% of the youth in the 15 to 29 age bracket are neither in employment, nor in training, nor in education. Only 37% of the skilled youth are employable. And some of these questions have resonated in the initial opening, the initial talk by Sujeev and subsequently by Rajeev, when Sujeev talked about, the skilling needs to be demand driven. And because it's not so in its fullest extent, we have these sort of statistics that are there. Now let's look at what does a youth really look for. Number one, youth looks for, post his education or his skilling. He looks for a decent job, maybe at an average of about 15 to 20,000 rupees a month. He looks for a job that gives him recognition, that gives him a decent work-life balance, a job that has a career progression, and a career progression or a wage progression that will enable him to have a roof above his head and also set up a family. And last but not the least, a skill or a job that will give him an opportunity to go abroad, because with the internet and the knowledge that people get about how life is abroad, there's definitely an attraction. So if we can create an environment, create an ecosystem that will satisfy some or all of these, then the youth will definitely get attracted to skilling as a choice, rather than just going by the traditional way of graduation or diploma in engineering or degree or a medical profession. So there are a lot of challenges that are there. And let me also say that in line with what Sujeev mentioned, that it's not a bleak picture. It is not a bleak scenario. There's a lot of good work happening in pockets in many areas. Unfortunately, today media doesn't talk about all the good things. So one first thing that I would like to share with this August audience is that we need to look at the positive things that is happening in the country. We need to do advocacy of those positive things and spread the good word around, because there's a lot of negativity that has come and that has got further accentuated by the COVID pandemic that is still there, lingering on. And we as a nation need to come out of this and come with a positive mindset and say that we can do it. Okay, so coming to the challenges, the first thing is that I think there is a lack of sufficient number of counseling centers or avenues by which the youth can get an idea of what are the opportunities that are there in the skilling ecosystem and the benefits that can happen if he takes up skilling. So what we need to do, and when I talk of a challenge, I'll also give a possible solution, and wherever possible, I'll give you some examples of where it is being done, because that is very important to know that it's not that nothing is being done, things are being done. We need to scale it up, spread it across the length and breadth of this country. So we need to have a effective career counseling, and counseling means that we need to make the youth understand that what is in it if he gets into the skilling mode, what is in it that post the skilling, the kind of job he will get, the kind of money he will get, the kind of conditions he will have to work in, so that he gets a good reality check. And as the previous speakers mentioned, that they just come and they think they want to get a 3-month program and then they'll get something, and when they really realize, come to know that this is the job where I have to work in sun under rainy condition, all that, they say I don't want this, and they don't either they move away from the training or they don't take up the job. So they must be made aware of what is it in it for them. They need to also be, some sort of an aptitude test has to be done. Maybe psychometric tests can be used, discussion with them, so that we also understand whether they are the right persons for this type of skill that we are asking them to get into. Career paths must be defined. And I'll give you an example. There's a very good training initiative that is run by the alumni of IIT. It's called PARFI, and I'm giving that example. So what PARFI does largely in the state of Jharkhand is they do training for construction skills and other skills. And I'll give you a typical example of what they do with respect to this activity that I mentioned. They go to the catchment areas. Before that, they actually have a tie-up with the potential employers, ask them, okay, how many carpenters you need, how many bar benders you need, etc. They make the estimate of what is the demand. Then they go to, and they also get a commitment from the employer that if I give you a skilled person who satisfies your requirement, what will be the wages you will pay? What are the possible sites that you will work? What will be the living conditions there? And then they go to this catchment area and they do something like what big corporates do in engineering colleges as pre-placement talks. So they share with this youth in that village. They tell them that, see, this is the kind of training we do. Once you do this training, or during the training, this is what we will teach you. We'll teach you skill, we'll teach you life skills, we'll teach you soft skills, we'll make you ready to face the world. This is the kind of employment you will get. These are the possible geographies you will work, and these are the conditions under which you will work. This may be the kind of accommodation you will get. So they give them a complete picture of what is in it for them, and then they take them into the training. So this is one very good example of how we could do effective counseling, and that will be one of the ways to attract the youth to take up skilling rather than just do a graduation, which may not make them employment at the end of the 3-year program. The second thing is that a career progression or a skilling roadmap is not there in most organizations. So if a workman gets into at a certain level, unless he's employed by the company itself, most companies use a lot of contract labor. And there is no career progression that the youth can see. Now, we need to bring this about. And, in all these things, it can be not done just by the government or by the private sector or by the government and the private sector. It has to be done by every one of us. We have to contribute something to make this a success. And that is where we say that this has to become a mass movement. And I'll give you an example. When we talk of the organization that employ contract labor, normally organizations talk of numbers. They say, I need 30 people, get 40 people, get 50 people. They don't get into into seeing what is the kind of people that the contractor employs. They do not look at what are the living conditions of these people. And last but not the least, what happens is they do not actually recognize these people as entities who are contributing valuably to the output of this organization. And I'll give you an example. In a typical factory, if I was an employee, I would know most of the employees by name, and I would, when I meet them on the way, I would wish them, hello Ramesh, hello Suresh, whatever. But when a contract worker comes, I don't even know his name. I don't even recognize him by name or wish him. I just see him as one more body that is doing a work that I have contracted for. We need to get out of this mindset. We need to understand, we need to know their name, we need to know their background. And even if it is 10 or 15, if each one of us at the workplace can recognize them by name, talk to them about their family, appreciate them when they do something, that will bring a recognition. And if the recognition spreads the word, skilling will become aspirational and youth will come for this. The third issue is that, so you need to recognize them and also...
Around 2 minutes.
Okay. Oh, I didn't know it's okay, fine. The other important thing is we need to focus on soft skills and life skills while we do the training. We also need to counsel the parents of these students that this is what is there in it for them, their children in skilling, what all I mentioned earlier. So we need to counsel them because many places in rural India, it's the parents who tell them, no, you do a BA or a BSc and look for a government job and not get into skilling. Okay. Then we also have to understand that not all of them can get jobs. We need to imbibe in them the qualities of what needs to be, they need to have in order to become good entrepreneurs. We need to give them the ability to understand finances, the ability to be customer facing, the ability to deliver quality with safety and productivity, and ensure that their business grows up. So this is another area we need to do. We are seeing this happening in some places. We need to scale it up. Entrepreneurship is something that is growing. We see many entrepreneurs. You see the street side hawker, vending, street side food maker, the dosa maker, they're all skilled. So there's a lot of informal skilling also going on, but we need to formalize wherever we can and try to connect this training program, which are short-term, with the apprenticeship program so that the employer also appreciates the value of the skilled manpower and there's a pull and therefore it becomes aspirational for the youth. Last but not the least, the fundamental fact is that India cannot offer jobs to all its skilled workforce or all its workforce. We need to find avenues for them to go abroad, and that is also one of the aspirations So if we can share the success stories of people who have grown in organizations after joining them as a skilled resource, people who got opportunities to go abroad, people who progressed to the level of supervisor and got absorbed in the parent companies, that will be another way of ensuring that the skilling becomes aspirational. I will now answer. Now the 12 minutes is over, so I'll answer the question that you asked me when Rajeev was speaking. That is how do we bring about more funding through a mandatory cess? So our chairman had made a request to the government, and it was sent to official that the 2% of CSR that is mandated for all corporates, we should make 10% of that. That is 0.2% of that should be mandatorily be for skilling. So that could create a pool of resources which can be used in whatever way for skilling and not put a strain on the government funding. But we have got a response from the Ministry of Corporate Affairs that that will not be possible, because they say that the government would not like to make the corporates decide where they should spend their money, because all the corporates are mandated to have a CSR committee which has responsible people, and therefore we will not like to impose our decision on how they should spend. That was one. The second thing they said was that after the skilling was introduced as one of the areas where CSR money can be spent, the percentage of CSR money that was spent in skilling grew up from 5 to 6% in 2015-16 to about 10% in 2019-20. As I say, it is increasing. Our chairman has thought of one more thing, that apart from this 2%, if we can put a small percentage of a cess, which should be for skilling on the private sector, like was done by the Vajpayee government during the Golden Quadrilateral Road project, that could also be one way. So these are the two things that, this is the second thing that we are trying, and the response to the first thing was what I shared. Okay.
I think my point is also that CSR end use today cannot be done for investment. For example, I asked, can they, part of the CSR budget they have, can you permit one of the end use of CSR for investment in social impact fund? So if they allow that, see, right now the money is used only to fund the training program, but not the trainer, the training organization, which is the investment we talked about. So I would like the thought to leave the thought with you to think about it. That will be a transformational thing to bring investment into this space, right?
Right. So now it is mostly of funding the project itself, not
correct.
the.
Correct. So yes. I'm going to invite the fourth speaker for today, Mr. Ramakrishnan, and BR or Ravi, as we call him. He's a chemical engineer from BHUIT, now IIT Varanasi, and a PGDM from IIM Calcutta. Ravi has been with TMI Group for a long time, but his main interest has been in large-scale understanding of why people learn, why people don't learn. In fact, I consider Ravi as a national leader in learning as a science. And I think skilling industry needs to look at learning as a science. It's not enough to say this is the curriculum, this is what we need to do. I think very often we miss the basic point that children have to absorb that learning. So one of the big advantages that Ravi also has is that last 20 years has been very actively involved in digital learning. And that's why the topics today, some of the questions which you have posed to Ravi to answer today are how to integrate digital skilling to cut cost and also increase effectiveness. This is the dream scenario. Cut cost, because otherwise then only you can scale up. Like what Ram said, you do a lot of counseling and do a lot of placement support. At the end of the day, you get paid 10,000 rupees. How can anybody do so many things in small amount of money? It's only possible if you cut the cost. So therefore, cutting cost, how do we, the digital skilling is the only option where you can cut cost and also increase effectiveness. So the questions are, what are the benefits and challenges in blended skill training? What has been your experience in digital skilling? What skills and what skills are not amenable to digital skilling? What should the government and employer do to promote digital skilling? And any other point that Ravi would like to add? Over to you, Ravi. Your 12 minutes starts now.
Thank you so much. You will see me coming through two devices. Unfortunately, I'm traveling right now, and the bandwidth is very poor in the airport lounge that I'm parked in. So let me start with what's the blend for a digital skilling program to be effective, so that we're all on the same page. Virtual instructor-led training, self-learning, action learning, and peer learning. These are the four pieces that we have experimented extensively now. And sorry. No, this one video is okay. I'm come twice, Archana. So let my video be off. The video from one of them. Okay. So these are the four pieces of the blend that we have really focused on, and we know that it works very well. And I'll talk about some examples of that. So if these are the four parts of the blend, what's been driving? I think the first question we need to answer is, what's driving this blended digital skilling? Obviously, the first layer is no choice but. Thanks to COVID, most of the face-to-face has been barred, or it can be stopped or stalled anytime. So obviously, that's a simple reason. At a layer two, what we're seeing is some companies, some organizations have tried blended models at the corporate level, at CSR funded skill building, and even some government skilling partners. The moment the blended model works reasonably well, they like it. They like it because the costs are down by over 50 to 60% in most cases, and they want to stay on. There is no more money to be spent on a hotel room or on food. There are no cribs about, I got 6 rotis and he got 5 rotis, or dal was too watery. All that mess is gone. So it's become a much easier piece to focus on. And the third layer, which is what I guess going forward, I see that as the key driver, is one, of course, the cost can be lower by 50 to 60%, but more importantly, that quality can be delivered. It can be delivered when you do digital blending. Many of us have experimented. We have done an experiment from last June, and Prudential Life became the first, ICICI Prudential Life became the first customer of ours. And we have delivered programs which are comparable in outcomes to what used to be delivered earlier in classroom. If you can do that digitally, if you can bring your cost down by 50, 60%, it's a no-brainer that going forward, it will be there. And also scale. The moment you go digital, scale becomes a very easy problem to solve. So those are the 3 layers of going, drivers for going there. So what are the benefits? Reiterating, costs are lower, but I think more interesting piece that we have discovered now is that the ownership has partly shifted to the trainee now. The moment it is digital, it's not that they can get away with just coming to a program and sitting there. It's all about, they get action learning agenda, they get some peer learning agenda. They have to go back there and do some work. If they don't do the work, then obviously they're missing out on learning, and then someone piles onto them. Either the instructor piles onto them or the corporate piles onto them. So it becomes much better, right? For all these reasons, and that impact can be measured much easier in a digital model compared to a plain classroom model. And once you've gone digital, you can sustain it over a period of time, and then that can give you ensure that skilling has really taken place in that person and they can deliver. Having said that, are there going to be some challenges? Of course, there are some challenges even now. It's all about device ownership. But what we have seen is people somehow make do. I'll give you an example. We work with Anganwadi workers around the country in a World Bank funded project. We have over 1.1 million learners, of which 760,000 have got certified. They borrowed devices from their husband, father, brother, probably neighbor. So they will make do. Same thing with bandwidth. Bandwidth is not stable around the country. So if you go digital, how can you ensure that the bandwidth exists? Again, somehow they make do. In the same case of Anganwadi workers, they spend 10 rupees every day to come in and learn. So if it's good quality learning, if they see value on it, they would come in. There are challenges on teaching behavioral skills. It's not easy, especially in a VILT mode. So we do digital animated scenario play and then branch scenarios so that behavioral skills can be driven. but it's not very powerful. Environment is another big challenge. Many of the learners who come into the skill come from poor backgrounds. There is significant disturbance at their home, right? Similar to how school kids are experiencing the digital classroom now. So how do you overcome the environmental challenges? So, and the last, of course, is device limitations. Most of them are not going to come from a laptop. They're going to come from a phone. When they come from a phone, how do you teach software skills? We have managed to work with 600 girls in a Microsoft-funded project using Kaizala platform of Microsoft. So there are workarounds. You can create apps in which they will practice software or they drop software in and check it. So there are apps available, but there are challenges. Definitely there are challenges in digital skilling. Some of the experiences I already spoke, some more that I would like to speak about is, we've worked with triple disadvantaged kids from poor towns, small towns, poor families, and they've studying in tier 3 colleges, not even tier 2, in an IBM funded program. And we have taught 2,200 of them AI and ML, and over 70% placement. And all of them have competed with the best of students from, rich backgrounds or well-off backgrounds, and 72% of them being women. So it is feasible to teach kids digitally and get them to practice it digitally and go and line up in a job. In fact, we're very proud in a Capgemini project, we have 100% placement in another program which we have done for them. But we also do a significant amount of work in BFSI. I think that's again very easily adopts IT devices and IT as a ability to get skilled. We do something like 2,000 to 3,000 people every month between insurance companies and banks, and get freshers skilled enough to play job roles. And I talked about the Anganwadi. Going on, how do we ensure? I think one of the questions in your mind will be when I said that we can ensure, or I can't say ensure, but we can tend towards delivering a program as well as you were to do it in the classroom. So number one, what you do is you limit what you will skill them on. Don't try to skill them on everything. If you try to skill them on the entire job role, which is the current model in NSBC or sector skills, that's a big headache. You put them on 90 days and you keep them somewhere and you're trying to make them a rocket scientist. It's not going to work. Let's find out key tasks. There is a fabulous Toyota model, which is itself is patterned after the US military model, which is called job instruction method. Teach them less, but teach them to perform it extremely well. Then they will be comfortable to get into the job. Quality of the blend is critical. Like I said, we need virtual instructor-led training, action learning, peer learning, self-learning, all of that. Quality of the VILT is very critical. You need a moderator. Our experience shows if you don't have a moderator along with a trainer, you can't drive interactions in the class. You need extremely structured content. If you again try and play around with content and not invest in it, you're going to get very poor outcomes. Next, if you really want the outcomes on the ground, activate them. They should get their first sale, their first installation of an AC or of a dish antenna, first processing of a document if I become an ITES officer. Give them the comfort that they can play the job role. The moment they're able to do that, they will sustain the job. Then they will stay on and they will perform. Murli also asked about what skills can be delivered or not delivered. I believe almost every skill can be delivered. Some of them are going to be very, very tough in some roles, like a lab technician or a nurse, especially if kinesthetic learning has to be very critical as a very, very critical piece of the blend. It's not going to be easy to do it purely digital. You have to get some physical into it. Last 2 points. What does the government do to drive digital skilling? They must first agree that the old model is dead, right? They can't insist that there has to be a large infrastructure and there has to be rooms and people have to come there. Blended is the way forward. Government has to agree. We are working like this in multiple countries with government departments. Everywhere there is a challenge. There are fears of letting go of a tried and tested model. Tracking alone is not enough. The government has to follow up on performance. They today follow up whether salary has been earned by this guy for 3 months or 6 months or 1 year. That is not good enough. Someone has to worry about performance. If they can perform, they will stay on. If they can perform, employers will retain them. So how do we change the whole narrative to performance instead of skilling? That is a very critical input. The last, in terms of employers to drive digital skilling, I believe they will automatically do this. Most of our customers are all experimenting and learning, many of them with us, but they will automatically do this for cost reasons and because they believe that the outcomes can be as good as what can come from digital, the old traditional way of skilling. Perhaps some of them need to be educated. Maybe that can be driven by ASTP, can be driven by NSDC, that we educate more and more of the corporate, especially the MSMEs, so that they can invest in it. And of course, when you do that, they will also believe that this can be used for upskilling and cross-skilling for sure. We're doing a number of upskilling and cross-skilling programs for banks and insurance companies and to ensure that they remain productive in the change scenario, in the continuously evolving scenario. So that's what I had to say, Murli, and I'll take any questions later on if they come up.
MD, you're on mute.
Can you hear me? Is my audio coming clearly now? Hello?
Yes, sir, coming clearly.
Yeah, so I'm going to say that Ravi has been very, very underplayed the kind of challenges and the learning that TMI had in the last 2 years of COVID, of understanding digital learning. I think the 2-3 points I want to emphasize before I invite the next speaker. Point number one, all of us in this room, all of us in the skill fraternity, we must learn to unlearn our past. If you try to extrapolate our past future in terms of blended models, it is going to be a tough one. We have unlearned a lot. Whatever we thought is not possible, the students are teaching us much more than what we thought. Our assumptions about students in the skill industry have to change. They're more aspirational. They want to use a device. They want to use electronic learning. They're more accountable for self-learning. If you put action learning, they're able to complete a lot of them. So I would strongly encourage everybody in the room, please unlearn yourself before we change the skilling paradigm. The second thing Ravi said, very important point about unlearning, please cut the width of training and focus on the depth of training. And I've said that repeatedly. I'm extremely disappointed because I'm not used to speaking very soft language like many of you do. I want to speak the truth. The truth is our entire skill pack, which we have created by sector skill councils, etc., it's all about width, not about depth. There are some 192 skills and attitudes and knowledge. I don't think you need many of them. You need only 40, 50, which he needs to know very well. And that's what Ravi talked about. Job instruction method basically says, cut down, reduce only that he needs to know on the first 90 days of his training on the job. That's all he needs to know. The rest he will figure out because people are smarter than what you think they are. So I'll stop with this. And I think, Ravi, thank you for bringing a lot of actual data. And I'm going to invite our last speaker, is actually well known to many people in this room. And also I'm a great believer and supporter of Manish. Manish is he brings a lot of refreshing change. He brought a lot of refreshing change in NSDC. He's a development economist. I think many of you know Nobel Prize laureates. Now, a lot of people are now understanding the development economist is all about learning from the target segment through experimentation, learning from what really works on the ground rather than putting our own thoughts in mind. So I think Manish comes with the mindset of trying, experimenting. He's, of course, a very unique combination. He was a past IAS officer, but went to World Bank, and during the World Bank time, I think he's got a lot of great exposure. And of course, in NSDC for 5 years, he's been a very, very valuable time. So I think I met Manish. I was also surprised to find out he's also an IIT Dhanbad. Of course, I think there seem to be too many engineers here. I don't know, it's good or bad for the skill industry, but Manish is also from IIT Dhanbad, and he did a post-graduation in Harvard Kennedy School in US, and obviously public policy. So I think there is a lot of expectation, Manish. I think you are the last speaker. I hope that that's why I told you that you are now free. You're not stuck to NSDC level, and therefore you cannot say many things when you are there. Now we are open. We are looking forward. I'm not trying to say we should criticize the past. I have no interest in that. But I'm interested in hearing from you, what are the way forward in the next 5 years and 10 years? And focus here has been for you, the topic has been on creating talent pipelines for export. We all know the reality. I think somebody mentioned, Ram mentioned about demographic dividend. You are pathetic in not producing enough jobs. Even 10% of the jobs that we need, we're not creating in this country. This is the truth. I think all of you know the data. I think where we are between 12 to 16 million people are coming into employable age group. We're not even creating 1 to 2 million jobs. This is the reality. So why should we export manpower? I want Manish to talk about it. What can we learn from the IT model? The IT model survived because the government didn't get involved. Thankfully, the IT industry flourished because government stayed away rather than giving land to Infosys and companies like that. They stayed away. And because of an export-oriented model, there was a lot of benefits. And therefore, IT model, we want to learn from. What can we learn from the IT model? What can we learn from the Gulf model? Gulf is exactly the opposite model. Many of our Indians, you know about planned migration, Manish, that how worldwide people look at planned and unplanned migration. And I think Indian classic example of the Gulf migration is unplanned migration. So we want to know what we can learn from the Gulf model and how do we create a talent pipeline ultimately to get people into skilled jobs abroad, not unskilled jobs. So this is what the opening lines are for you, Manish. And you got 12 minutes and please feel free to share your thoughts. Over to you, Manish.
Thank you, Murli. It's a great pleasure to be part of this discussion. And I must congratulate TMI for picking up this important topic, given all your experience and your exposure to this world of skilling from very early years. When skilling started in India, I think you have been pushing this agenda. So we had some very rich discussion. I will keep myself to a few of the points which you mentioned. Firstly, I think we need to, when we plan for our country, we need to keep in mind that we are both a country and also a continent. If you look at our size, 1.3 billion is the population of entire African continent. So if you are trying to make a policy which is for Africa as a continent, it'll really not work. There are so many parts to it. And in the context of India also, therefore, we have to become a little more, I guess, we need to decompose ourselves when we are planning and look at, let's say, Manipur and how that will send manpower abroad, different from how Kerala will do it and why Kerala will do it. So the reasoning, the logic, and the history and the manner in which you will go planning it is going to be different. Yes, there is also the government that is universal within India, and therefore how we deal with that, what are its limitations. The fact that there is the political economy aspect of things, there is a public policy aspect of things, and there is a market economics aspect of things. The government, the civil servant, and when it comes to the market, the training partners and the industry. So how these three are interacting and how can we deal with them? I think that's a very important part. And nobody is right, nobody is wrong in my view. Everybody comes with a perspective. The question is, can we get a room where people agree on certain basics, and that leads the country forward? So that's how we have to look at solution. And coming to, I think, specifics, if I look at the segment of Indian labor, which we should be focusing if we are to build a talent pipeline for abroad, there are a few things we have to keep in mind. If we divide the labor income profile into 4 quartiles, the lowest income quartile, 25% and below, are earning about 18,000 rupees per month or less. The second income quartile actually earns between 18 to 37,000 rupees per month. Then the third income quartile earns between 37,000 rupee to 57,000 rupee per month. And the highest income quartile is actually 57,000 and above. Anybody who earns above 88,000 rupee per month is actually the top 10% of India's income profile. So I think it's very important to understand that when you are planning, for which group are you planning? We often talk as though what applies to 18,000 and below also applies to 88,000 and above. It is not like that. So when we look at IT world, it's basically the high end of India, 88,000 and above. When we look at government's concern, it is usually about 18,000 and below. So a lot of money which is focused is on that segment. So if you want to send people abroad and we want to create a pipeline, I think few things we have to keep in mind is outside, what is the market looking for outside India? It's basically people who are relatively skilled, and they want people, not somebody who is just new to the job or just got his training last year and wants to move, but somebody with some experience. And therefore, we therefore have to keep our focus on those which are in the middle segment, somewhere around 37,000 plus minus whatever. But you get a sense that we are looking at a certain age bracket and also income bracket within which people are wanted abroad. Demographic divide in itself is not sufficient condition, because I think it's opportunity. There's no doubt about that. But the youngest population in the world today is Afghanistan. It's about 19 years, right? The average is. And that's definitely not an example any of us would want to follow. So that shows the potential of opportunity, as well as the fact that that itself is not sufficient. That's just a kind of a situation which could actually help us if we get our acts right. There are actually specific districts within our country where the potential for sending people abroad is higher. People are already going from this country, from these districts. And I think the first part we need to focus is, can we get our act right in these districts, so that we ensure that more people from there go. The reason is, whenever a person goes abroad, they need a social capital to survive out there. So I have noticed this, like people going from India to Japan, they feel extremely isolated in a new country, in a new environment, unless there is let's say, a group of person who are willing to be their social capital in a new country. So how do you create that environment? I think that's an important part of things. Some of us actually think about Kerala and we look at the fact that people went to Gulf, it was unplanned. But if you look at history of Kerala, I don't know if you have read this book called The Ivory Throne. It's a very interesting book. It's about Kerala. And Kerala has such a strong connect with Middle East. Is very intriguing that even in 15th century or 16th century, there were Hindu families in Kerala who used to bring up one of their sons in the Islamic religion. The reason was there were a lot of traders coming from Arab world, and they wanted the Arab folks who are coming there to feel comfortable. So therefore, there was a kind of relationship that they had been building up. And that's, of course, many 100 years back, 400-500 years back, but shows a tradition. And therefore, it's not as though, things happen in vacuum. There's a kind of, let's say, relationship that builds up institutionally and eventually translates into something which is interesting in the world today. And we find a lot of Keralites actually in UAE today. And if you look at total number of Indians who have moved out, it used to be about 7 million in 1990. By about 2017, we had about 18 million people from India who moved abroad. It's not sufficient. Obviously, we can do far much more. But I think that does show that the growth has been there. Some of the states taking the lead. We are also aware that many of the blue-collar workers actually been returning back. There's a reduction out there, whereas there is a demand for white-collar worker, which is increasing. So I think we have to understand the pattern. We have to maybe plan separately for how Mizoram should be looking at his pipeline abroad, how Manipur should look at it, because there's so much of demand for Manipur when it comes to healthcare in Japan, for that matter, Nagaland for healthcare in Japan. And therefore, we focus on that, Arunachal, Manipur, and Nagaland, looking at maybe Japan for healthcare. And then there could be another set of people who could probably be looking at UAE. And there are markets in Nordic countries which are looking specifically for people from India in IT world, and with artificial intelligence and such kind of specialization. So I guess we need to get granular, and that's one of my suggestions out there. My strong belief is also that the manner in which we skill people should be related to the employers of that particular area. And how we create that signaling is through an assessment methodology that both has agreed to. So there has been discussion, for example, with UAE government on how should you accredit. And of course, SSCs are involved in that, construction SSC in particular. And there has been mapping of India's way of skilling with the manner in which they want people skilled. And a certification that therefore SSC is going to issue will be accepted by the government of UAE. So those kind of, I think, groundwork is essential. I'm aware that government actually is doing quite a bit on that. But this partnership between private sector and government becomes very critical here. Particularly the role of embassies are very, very important. And I've noticed some embassies actually very, very proactive on this. We have had, during my time at NSDC, for example, I used to find India's embassy in Moscow actually extremely active in terms of getting skilled manpower from here. And Ram is aware in some cases, the very complex demands which they made which the Russian counterparts made, and L&T could actually satisfy them because they had that know-how as well as the kind of labor that is needed to work on, I think, shipbuilding at that particular point of time. So we have the capacity. The question is, are we connecting the two markets? And the embassies, therefore, can become the via medium through which the private sector is connected to the needs and demands in that particular country. So how do we build that? A last thing which I want to emphasize, a very important one, is again drawing from IT industry, that too much of direct money to private sector from the government side as a subsidy often leads to problem, because as I said, in public policy, when government gives money, the tendency to control how that is spent becomes too strong. And therefore you begin to put rules and regulation which are anti-market. It doesn't really work, it actually opposes market in some sense. And but if you look at it from a public policy perspective, is the right thing being done from their perspective, because they are trying to ensure that the money is used accountably. However, this balance between how do you create smoothness of operations, the private sector operations, and accountability, that balance is lost in the whole process, and you will find that things actually go downhill. So one of the ways to deal with this is actually to have tax credits, have fiscal mechanism. That, for example, let's say Y-axis today. Y-axis does great job sending a lot of people abroad, blue collar, white collar, a lot of people. Can you give certain tax breaks to companies which are able to excel above a certain level? You have to begin to think of fiscal incentives there. So you are not getting into the nitty-gritty of business of Y-axis, trying to tell the CEO of Y-axis how you should run your company. And then basically telling him that you need to do this, you need to do that. That will not work. You need to agree that he knows his job well, and that if he exceeds a certain parameter, then it's so good for the country that you want to give him a tax break. You want to give him certain credits, some incentive structure which actually builds his motivation and also creates others to compete with him because they see the benefit that will come from it. This actually applies even for training partners, honestly, that instead of focusing on giving a grant-based subsidy, you give them output-based aid, based on certain fiscal incentives. And how do you go there? I think that's a detailed discussion, but that's something which ASTP should reflect deeply, and with the help of right partners, take it forward to government, because in the long term, I think that's the only way you can skill India to the level that we really want. The market has to be operational. We need to also respect the government's desire that money should be accountable, and therefore, how do you create that balance? How do you ensure that the short-term pressures which politicians often face is that they have promised something to the electorate. So therefore, there is the political economy aspect that they want to meet certain numbers, and these are real things in a democracy. It's not a small, trivial thing. It may look so from the perspective of private sector, but if you look at it from a political perspective, you have made commitments and you have to go back after 5 years. So therefore, they are right in the political economy perspective. But then I think the public policy architecture that you are trying to get actually is therefore not really leading to what the market wants. And therefore, there's a disconnect between these three. And how do we ensure that all the three gets balanced and each of them is able to achieve their respective goals? That's where we should head. And that's where the discussion should be. So these were a few thoughts which I wanted to share. Thank you so much, Murli, for inviting me.
Thank you, Manish. As usual, you're very concise, precise, and I'm very happy that you mentioned many points. Like you mentioned, I asked the same question about blended models. When you want to do a blended model with the government cannot dictate the terms. And you said you on one side, you are coming from the supply side and you're dictating to the market side. How will it work? You can't dictate to the market side. Market should be dictated to the supply side. We are doing the other way around because the government is funding. So I think one point you said very clearly, and I think takeaway for me from this session is that yes, the government has a responsibility. The money is well spent. The government is accountable. There is a CAG to be accountable. But there are very good models wherein the government can do, for example, what you said about don't pay the money for skilling. Pay them the money after they get skilled and get a job in 90 days. Pay to the employer. And where is the question of anything? You already validated 90 days, he spent with the employer. He's already got a job. He's got skilled, but the employer paid for the skilling. Now we have to think of newer models of funding this entire ecosystem so that the government takes its hands off. I think IT industry, as you mentioned correctly, if I have to write one simple thing, the government took its hands off the IT industry. It allowed the export markets, the customers to drive the equations. And so I want to just thank you for that. And I want to request a 20-minute extension from the speakers, because this last session is on Q&A. I'm going to ask Mr. Peter to do that. Can I request all the speakers to stay back for another 15-20 minutes? Is it possible?
Yep. Okay.
Right. Thank you so much, Peter. I think you've been getting all the questions. So I think frame not more than 5 or 6 questions, Peter. What do you think is very relevant? And then let's rest of the questions we'll answer later on. But we'll have to shut down this session in the next 20-25 minutes maximum. Over to you, Peter.
Thank you, TMD. Thank you, all the speakers. Wonderful insights and inputs have come. The first question has come from Lakshman Gurumurthy. Point is, by adding more and more layers, are we not pulling skilling space in different directions?
Let's aim at whom do you want to
maybe Manish can answer this.
So more and more layers, I think, as I was saying, that layers might be necessary, but layers would be, I think we have to understand the segmentation of the market. So if you're adding a particular layer in Manipur, please don't add that layer in Kerala. That's what I was saying, that we probably need to be much more careful about why we are adding that layer, where we are adding that layer, and when we should add that layer. I think adding layer is fine because India is so vast. One thing will not work. There's no one solution that fits all. There's no silver bullet to this problem. So therefore, we have to get granular. But the moment you get granular, we should know that different approach will succeed in different parts of India and also different income profiles of India. Who gets 88,000 rupee and above, you don't treat that person the same as somebody who gets 18,000 rupee and below. We need to differentiate that. I think that's what, so layers are okay. How do you apply that layers is the key. So that's how I would feel about it.
Yeah, I agree with Manish. I think the layer must be adding value.
Absolutely.
Not affecting value. I think
Absolutely.
very often we don't know the difference between these two. Sometimes
Absolutely.
layers are added just to make convenience of spend, for example. I want a layer, but that's not adding value. So I think your point is very valid. Customize the layer based on the segment and where you are operating. And more importantly, they must add value. Otherwise, they have no business to exist. I think that point we agree. Peter, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Manish. Thank you, Buddy. The next question before I ask, can I request the audience? Archana has put a link in the chat window. If you can please share your feedback so that it will work as an inputs for us to make sure that the next one we run, we can keep those in mind. This question is from a person named Manish. The gist of the point is mostly in training delivery. I will direct this question to Ravi Ramakrishnan and Mr. Rajeev Sharma, saying that the facilitators or the trainers involved in the training projects are not treated well by the training organizations. And by involving them as partners, this whole thing, training can get implemented far better. The progress can be far better if you treat the training partners or the facilitators or the trainers as partners rather than some resources.
Would you like to go first, Peter? Do you want me to go first or Rajeev to go first?
Yeah, anybody. Both of you are on the implementation side. So I'll ask Rajeev to go first and then you can answer.
Okay. So whoever suggested that they should be treated as a partner is a very good suggestion. And frankly, Peter, in last about 18 months, there have been certain courses which are delivered online. We have get the best experts from the industries to teach on the platform, and they're not on a remuneration, fixed remuneration, they're part of the course. So suppose there is a revenue collector, and I'm giving an example of 5 lakh rupees for a batch, there is certain percentage goes. So we've got almost 100, 150 such partners. So I'm saying I must compliment the person who asked this question. The other part of that they should be treated well is, both sides of the story. Initial part when I joined the industries, when I quit my corporate job, I came here, I found the quality of trainers were quite, I would say, mildly poor. Anybody who couldn't do anything became a vocational trainer. So then, of course, it was very difficult to frankly treat them with that respect with their demand. But over a period of time, I think the situation has changed. There are multiple, because of Sector Service Council, at least as I said in the beginning, has helped in at least delivering this portion well of getting trainers trained well, and they get drawing respect. The price points have gone up. So in 2008 to 2009, the trainers, vocational trainers will get any salary between 8 to 10,000. Now, none of them get anything less than 20,000, 15,000 people. So that proves a point that they have come up a long way, but there is still scope for betterment of their career and better on their quality of training. But the partner part is going to help this sector grow for at least online training very well. Thanks. Hope I answered the question.
Thank you. Thank you, Rajeev.
To continue with what Rajeev was saying, I think we believe that every trainer that we deploy is a partner, because the training will be not successful unless the trainer does his part in motivating the learners to learn. And especially in a blended learning format, there is no question of using a trainer as someone who will come in and stand in for 2 hours and deliver something and go away. It's extremely important that they're good, they are trained. So we genuinely believe that partnership is the only way to go. We have to invest in them. We invest in their training. We get them to meet with the client, take client inputs, and client certifies them. So there is a pride that they are a certified access trainer or a Prudential Life trainer, right? So there is a lot of pride that we need to build in with partners to continue to work with us. There are many models out there. Some are deeply coupled and some are loosely coupled. So when we do deeply coupled, they're as good as our employees, right? We have about 180 trainers who are deeply coupled with us, which means they do between 18 to 20 days of training with us. That is almost booked for the whole month. But there are some who get only 5 to 6 days or 7 days in a month, which are loosely coupled. And it's doubly important on the training company's part to invest in them and then continue to work with them and make them successful. Things will go wrong occasionally, and then when they go wrong, you will have to sit and clean it up. But we have to treat them like partners and make it happen.
Thank you. Thank you, Ravi. Ravi, I think this next question also I will direct it to you. The question is on, are there any training models which are making the trainees as entrepreneurs post the training? So if you can throw some light on this.
Are there any training modules to make the trainees entrepreneurs?
Instead of looking for a job, that they go do some self-employment, some kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There are very structured modules available from many companies, including our own, which we do for some of those who aspire to get into this. But my advice to an average trainee would be that they go and experience the role. We have seen hundreds of AC mechanics and dish antenna installers whom we have trained, whom we have placed with LG or Samsung dealers. After about 7 or 8 months, once they've really learned the job, then they use that entrepreneurial skills and go and become entrepreneur themselves. They employ somebody. That's a very powerful model, but that experience is required. You can't, if you're fresh, you can't get skilled and then overnight become an entrepreneur. It's tough.
Yeah. The next question I will direct it to Mr. Ramakrishnan. This question is, how do governments shift accountability to the trainee from the training partner? So till that doesn't happen, there is no value for the free training or free funding which the government is doing towards skills.
Yeah, I think the best way to put the accountability on the trainee is to have a co-pay model. And that is something that is working in quite a few places. I just mentioned about an organization which is doing in such work in Jharkhand. So the model is that they get a loan through NABARD, and because the employment is almost guaranteed because you have done a demand-driven training program for them, the ability to pay back is also there. So when you have a commitment in the game, you become more serious, more committed, and therefore you do justice to the training that is imparted to you, and also continue to do a good job while in the workplace because you have an obligation to fulfill. So I think that is one of the best ways. The free model, unfortunately, anything that is free is not taken as seriously as it should be. So the co-pay model, where a part is paid by the candidate, which could be, as I said, funded by a loan, is the best way forward.
Ram, can you also talk about a skill coupon model?
Yeah.
That's a very interesting model. The student gets a coupon, he can go and exchange it to any training partner. So he becomes accountable on where it was for training. Why is it not worked? Why we not implemented that model so far?
Yeah, I think that's also fine. But, Murli, I am of the opinion that, in whatever we do, there has to be a stake of everybody in it, and including the trainee. Okay, for a very poor section, this coupon model will be better so that it is utilized. But when we talk about accountability, when the commitment is there, it will be even more impactful, I think.
This question I will direct it at Rajeev. Rajeev, this is maybe from your task experience. The question is, can we benchmark the training standards for the entire training industry, where the skills, experience, exposure, knowledge, and skills are well defined?
Can you repeat that question, Peter?
So, can we benchmark the training standards being delivered by various skill organizations, keeping in mind the industry for which it is being trained?
Yes, absolutely. It can be benchmarked, and the simplest answer to that is, if any training partner delivers a training, what percentage of those get placed? That's a very simple metric. The second one is when people go through training, what is it that is additional the training has done over what that person has done either in graduation, polytechnic, or engineering. So one of the ways to look at employability is, how is it the social capital or the psychological capital or even the academic capital of that youth or student who has taken impacted. So these are two cuts, but this requires a detailed discussion. But overall, simple. You've gone through a training. If you've got a job, I think impact of training is there.
Peter, I just wanted to add something which I think is important. Currently a lot of state level skill competitions are going on, which will lead on to the regional competition, to the India level competition, and finally the finalists who qualify at the India level go to the world skilling competition in Shanghai. Why not we think of the standard that are established in the world skill competition as the standards for our curriculum, benchmark it with them, then we would be truly moving towards making our workforce as good as anybody in the world. For Neeraj Chopra to think of 90 meter as the benchmark and then practicing towards it and ending up with 86 is a very good example. If we can leverage the skill standards that are set up in the world skilling competition, either the earlier one or the one that's going to happen next year, it will be a very big step towards making our skilling levels of a much better order and making the workforce globally competitive.
Yeah, and Peter, just one more additive point to what Mr. Ramakrishnan mentioned. There are NSQF, there's a national standards that are set up by the MSDE that also could be used as a benchmark for assessing training impact.
Thank you. Well, final question before, so we will end because the session is going to extend. So before I ask this question, I think this question will be for Mr. Ramakrishnan. Before I ask this, I'll once again request the audience, if you can please give your feedback on the forms. It'll help us improve. So this question, Mr. Ramakrishnan, for you is, the government has invested in the past with ITI and polytechnic colleges and skill training industry, which are now, some of them are useless and abandoned. Okay? Can we channelize them to the advantage of skilling the country? So that's the question.
Yeah, it is to me, no? K. Ramakrishnan?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Good question. And I think this is a good way of utilizing these resources that are available and being underutilized. So one of the plans we are making at NHDC and that is being driven by the management of NHDC, supported by the chairman of the board, is that we are looking at, cluster-based skilling, where we identify a few clusters, understand what is the demand, develop the QPs, modify the QPs in line with what that cluster needs, get in good training partners to develop high quality skilling. And there we are looking at how do we utilize the existing ITI facilities, either in terms of infrastructure or equipment, to create large training centers which will cater to these needs. So this is something where we need not invest in new capital for land or building. We can give it to identified training partners who have set a good benchmark in terms of quality of training, and leverage the assets that are available and lying underutilized. So this is something we are working on. Hopefully it should happen. Very good suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So I think there is one more very interesting question came. I'm sorry. This I will ask Ravi Ramakrishnan. Can getting a job convey that the training has got the impact in skilling? And this is one part of the question. So what about the people who join corporates? How does the upskilling happen? So these two questions, and we will end. Audience, sorry, there are so many questions coming in. We will end with this last one. Ravi, over to you.
Peter, maybe we can take those questions to them since we know who asked the question, right?
Yes.
So coming to the question that you posed to me, item number one, the question about does joining indicate? No, it does not. Staying in the job indicates, performing in the job indicates. We have seen a lot of early attrition if the person is not skilled well, and then he can't deliver the job. Like I said, they have to do the first sale or they have to do the first installation, then they will stay. So staying in the job is a better indicator than just joining a job. That's very important. The second part of your question was in terms of, can you repeat that question, Peter?
So what happens to the people who join an organization? What about upskilling?
For upskilling them. That is something that the organization invests in. Again, they bring in partners like, us or other ATP, ASTP partners are there. Many of us are part of the skilling ecosystem for maybe the first 4 or 5 years. The front line and the one manager to the front line. These two are very important roles. So it's important to sustain that. And that is something that organizations are happy also to outsource as long as you can deliver value out there.
So with that,
I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, Ravi, thank you. Thank you so much. With that, I just want to hand it back to Murli to just thank especially the distinguished speakers and close the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, all the speakers, the audience. You've been lovely. I want to close by only one or two important conclusions which I have gathered from this meeting. I think that fundamentally the skill ecosystem has to move away from certification to employment, from employment to the salary that we get paid on the employment, and retention period on the job. Now, Ravi talked about performance, and performance actually boils down to two things: what salary he gets paid and how long he's able to hold on to the job. Today, those metrics are still struggling. We have a 90-day retention clause in many of our contracts, but I think getting the right compensation is very key. And I think I've also published on this. It's extremely unfortunate there is no skill premium in this country. The unskilled player and the skilled player, the difference between semi-skilled and unskilled in minimum wages is 2%. At the minimum wage level, you can imagine what really happens on the ground. So I think skill partners, and I think NSDC at one point of time were trying to grade training partners into A, B, C, D, and they need some criteria. And definitely, I think the shift in my mind going forward in the next 25 years, we should go away from the philosophy that there is a skill pack, we have to complete it, get assessment, and my job is done. We have to change that mindset to say, sorry, my job is to make sure the skill guy gets the right salary and he stays in the job and succeeds in the job. If you change that mindset and we put that part, the training individual, the skill individual at the center of this entire skill universe, rather than government or the skill training partner at the center of the universe. If you change that paradigm, I think in the next 25 years, I think India will become the skill capital of the world. With that, I will stop. And I want to again thank every one of you. It's been a pleasant and a wonderful experience. And I request again Ramkrishnan from L&T to think about the next event we can do together, especially listening to the voice of the youth. Because I think there have been a lot of surprises for us. There are a lot of assumptions we make about what they want and what we don't want. It's a good idea to listen to some of them. And maybe I request either an NSDC or a L&T initiative, and we like to partner it in case Ramkrishnan wants to. Thank you so much. Have a lovely evening, and see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Murli. Thank you very much.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.